The badge hit the glass counter with a sound so small it shouldn't have mattered. But it did. The woman behind the counter, mid-40s, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, the kind of person who had seen everything twice, looked down at it, then up at the man standing across from her. She didn't reach for it right away. That was the thing about Shirley Oakes. She always gave people a second to change their minds. The man didn't change his mind. His name was Edmund Walcott, 61 years old, 6'1", though age had shaved half an inch off that. He wore a gray wool coat that had been good once. The kind of coat you could tell had been dry cleaned with regularity, back when regularity was possible. His hands rested flat on the glass case, and if you looked at those hands, you'd know things about him that his face wouldn't tell you. Scarred across the knuckles, steady, the hands of a man who had worked with them for 40 years and was not ashamed of that. On the glass between those hands sat a Toronto Fire Service's Commendation medal, the kind they give you at a ceremony in a box lined with velvet when you pull 3 children out of a burning building on Gerrard Street and don't stop to calculate whether the ceiling will hold. It had held. Barely. That was 1997. "I can do 250, Shirley said, not unkindly." Edmund Walcott looked at the medal, then he looked at the wall behind her, the pegboard of pawned guitars and camera lenses and things that used to mean something to somebody. 300, he said. Shirley looked at him over her glasses. 275, that's the number I can write on the slip. He nodded once, the kind of nod that costs something. She reached for the medal. "Excuse me." The voice came from the back of the shop, not loud, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud. His name was Terrell Obichambers, 26 years old. He was standing near the end of the display case holding a shoebox tucked under one arm, and he had the look of a man who had been about to mind his own business until something in him decided he couldn't. He was still in his Canadian Armed Forces uniform, not because he was showing off. He'd driven straight from Trenton, 11 hours. He hadn't even stopped to change. Shirley looked at him. "Help you?" "I'm sorry," Terrell Obichambers said, and he was talking to Edmund Walcott, not to her. Is that a Toronto Fire Commendation?" Edmund turned slowly. He had the composure of a man who did not startle easily. "It is." Terrell set his shoebox on the counter, stepped forward, looked at the medal the way you look at something that belongs to a world you were taught to respect before you understood why. "Gerrard Street Fire," Edmund said before Terrell could ask. "February, 97. Terrell was quiet for a moment. Then, "I was 2 years old in February 97. "I know," Edmund said. "You were all 2 years old." Something passed between them that Shirley couldn't quite name. She'd been running this shop for 19 years. She'd seen men sell their wedding rings, their grandfather's watches, their children's instruments. She'd learned not to editorialize. But she took her hand off the medal. "Sir," Terrell said, "you don't have to do this." Edmund Walcott looked at him with the patience of a man who had heard well-meaning things before. "Son, I appreciate that. But I do. What do you need it for?" It was a direct question, verging on rude if you didn't understand that some people ask direct questions because they actually want to help, not because they want to watch you answer. Edmund was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Shirley busied herself with something behind the counter. "Dialysis," he said finally. 3 times a week, Oakville. My truck needs a timing belt before it'll pass safety, and I've got about 4 days before the repair shop closes the estimate. Terrell didn't say anything. He picked up the shoebox he'd set down and placed it on the counter beside the medal. He opened it. Inside, a Seiko watch. Men's. Gold-toned. The crystal was scratched, but the face was clean. And an envelope, the kind you get from a bank machine. Thick. "That was my father's watch," Terrell said. He said it plainly. He died in 2019. "I've been meaning to sell it for 2 years and I could never do it." He took the watch out and set it beside Edmund's medal. The 2 objects sat on the glass together. "I was going to get maybe 400 for the watch," Terrell said. "I only need 3. For a storage unit. I'm getting posted to Edmonton in 2 weeks and I can't take everything." He paused. "You take the 400, I'll figure out the storage." Edmund Walcott looked at the watch, then at the young man, then back at the watch. "I'm not taking your father's money." "It's not my father's money," Terrell said. "It's mine. I earned it. I can give it to whoever I want." "That's not—" "Sir." Terrell's voice was quiet, steady. "You ran into a burning building when I was in diapers. You don't have to explain to me why you matter." The shop was very still. Shirley pretended to be counting something in the drawer. Edmund Walcott stood there with his coat and his dignity and his 61 years, and for just a moment, just a beat, something in his face shifted. Not broke, shifted. The way a door shifts on its frame in winter without opening. "I don't know you," Edmund said. "Why would you do this?" It wasn't really a question. Terrell Obichambers looked at him for a moment before answering. "Because nobody did it for my father," he said. "And I think about that a lot. What you should know about Edmund Walcott is this. He spent 31 years with Toronto Fire Services. He made captain in 2003. He was the first black captain in Station 24's history, a fact that the department mentioned at his retirement dinner and that Edmund himself almost never brought up, because he had complicated feelings about being someone's first. Not because he wasn't proud, but because he thought about all the men who should have been first before him and what that silence meant. He retired in 2017. Kidney disease had been a quiet companion since 2014, the kind of diagnosis that doesn't announce itself dramatically, but simply begins rearranging your life from the inside out. By 2021, he was on dialysis. By 2023, his wife, Odette, had gone back to work full-time. She was a school librarian, 62 years old, and she did it without complaint, which was both admirable and quietly devastating to a man who had spent his life being the one who handled things. He sold the house in Scarborough in 2022. Too much space. Too many stairs. They moved to a one-bedroom in Etobicoke. It was fine. It was more than fine. They had each other. They had their daughter's voice on the phone every Sunday. But the truck was dying, and without the truck there was no dialysis, and without dialysis there was about 10 days before things became a medical emergency, and Edmund Walcott was not going to let his wife watch that happen. Not if he had anything left to sell. The metal was the last thing of value that was only his. The house was gone. The retirement savings had been strategic and slow. The watch Odette had given him for their 30th anniversary. He'd sold that in January without telling her. He told her he'd lost it at the clinic. She looked at him for a long moment and didn't say anything, which meant she knew, which meant she loved him enough not to say it out loud. The metal was the last thing. He'd taken it out of the lockbox that morning while Odette was at school. He'd sat at the kitchen table with it in his hand for 20 minutes. He'd thought about the Gerrard Street fire. He'd thought about the family. Mother, 2 sons, 1 daughter, and a grandmother who didn't make it down the stairs. He'd thought about the way the ceiling felt when it groaned above him. He'd thought about whether he was afraid. He hadn't been afraid. He'd been focused. There's a difference. He put on his coat and drove to the shop on Dundas. What you should know about Terrell Obichambers is this. His father, Mervyn Obichambers, had come to Canada from Kingston in 1989 at the age of 24. He worked in a warehouse in Mississauga for 7 years. He took night school. He got certified in HVAC. He built a small business, 3 vans, 4 employees, his name on the side in blue lettering. He was proud of those vans. He'd take pictures of them sometimes for no reason, the way you take pictures of things that prove something. Mervyn died of a heart attack in November 2019. He was 54. He was at a job site in Brampton when it happened. His employee called 911. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was already too late. Terrell was 21. He'd been in basic training for 3 months. He came home for the funeral in his uniform, which felt strange because his father had wanted him to enlist, and now his father was gone, and the uniform felt like a thing that had outlasted its reason. But he stayed in. Because he didn't know what else to do with grief except keep moving, and because somewhere he thought his father was watching, and he didn't want his father to see him stop. The watch had been on Mervyn's wrist when he died. The hospital gave it back in a plastic bag. Terrell had kept it in the shoebox ever since. He carried it with him through 2 postings. He didn't wear it. He wasn't sure he had the right to wear it. He'd decided, sometime around hour 7 of the drive from Trenton, that the watch was going to become a storage unit. And a storage unit was going to let him leave cleanly, and leaving cleanly was going to let him become whatever he was becoming next. He had not planned for Edmund Walcott. You rarely plan for the things that matter. Shirley Oakes had a policy. She didn't get involved. In 19 years, she had kept that policy with 2 exceptions. Once in 2014, when a young woman was clearly selling something that wasn't hers, and once now, she looked at the 2 objects on her counter. The medal, the watch. She looked at the 2 men. She picked up the Commendation medal and held it out to Edmund Walcott. "I'm not buying this," she said. Not unkindly. That's my professional opinion. Edmund looked at her. Provenance is too complicated, she said, which was not true, but which was the most dignified fiction she could offer him. I can't move it. It would just sit. He took it back slowly, held it. What I can do, Shirley continued, looking somewhere between the two of them, is give you a fair price on the watch. $4.50. The crystal's scratched, but the movement is clean and Seikos from that era hold well. Terrell started to say something. $4.50, Shirley said again firmly. For the watch. That's my offer. She looked at Terrell. And you? She reached under the counter and pulled out a piece of paper, a card, actually, from a stack. She kept near the register. She slid it across to him. My brother-in-law has a storage facility in Pickering. Tell him Shirley sent you. He does a military discount that isn't on the website. Terrell looked at the card, then at her. Why? He said. Shirley put her glasses back on. Because I was in the forces, she said, in the tone of a woman who did not make a habit of mentioning it. Petawawa, 2C or 8 years. She went back to her drawer. Now are we doing this or not? Edmund Walcott drove home to Etobicoke with $450 in his coat pocket and his medal in his other pocket, and he sat in the parking lot of their building for a while before he went up. He thought about the young man in the uniform. He thought about the watch that man had been carrying. He thought about what Terrell Obi Chambers had said, nobody did it for my father. And he thought about how some grief doesn't show up as sadness, it shows up as action. As a young man driving 11 hours and walking into a pawn shop and making a decision in under 2 minutes that most people would spend a week deliberating. He thought about the father, Mervyn. He didn't know that name, but he knew that type of man. He had worked beside men like that his whole career. Men who built things with their hands and their years and their stubbornness. Men who made vans with their name on the side because they needed something in the world to prove they'd been here. Edmund reached into his pocket and held the medal, just held it. The same way he'd held it that morning at the kitchen table. The difference was this time he put it back. He went upstairs. Odette was making tea. She looked at his face when he came in. She had been reading his face for 34 years, and she was very good at it, and she didn't ask about the medal. She handed him a cup and sat down at the table and waited. Truck's getting fixed Thursday, he said. She nodded. Good. Met someone today, he said. Young man. Forces. Yes? His father built a business, Edmund said. AVAC died young. He wrapped his hands around the mug. Kid drove 11 hours to sell a watch that wasn't really for sale. Odette was quiet for a moment. What did he do with it? Sold it anyway, Edmund said. She thought about that. And the medal? He reached into his pocket and set it on the table between them. She looked at it, then at him. I wasn't ready, he said simply. Odette put her hand over his. I know, she said. I've known the whole time. Outside, the February light was going the way it goes in Toronto, slowly, stubbornly, unwilling to give up the last gray hour of the afternoon. The kind of light that doesn't tell you anything is going to be fine. It just stays. It just refuses to go completely dark. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at Station 24, Edmund's old station. The desk sergeant forwarded it to Edmund's address, not knowing what else to do with it. Inside was a card. No return address, just a Trenton postmark. Sir, I looked you up through the department records. I hope that's not strange. I just wanted you to know that the watch sold for $450 and the storage unit cost $180, so I had $270 left. I donated it to the Kidney Care Foundation at Toronto General, in my father's name. I thought he'd like that. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I think I wanted someone to know that it didn't just disappear. Corporal T. Obi Chambers, 2R Cree Edmund, read the letter twice. Then he folded it and put it in the lockbox, next to the medal. He thought about calling the station and asking if anyone knew how to reach a Corporal Obi Chambers at 2RCR. He thought about what he would even say. He thought about the money. $270 given in a dead man's name to a cause that kept men like Edmund alive. He thought about how Mervyn Obi Chambers had never met him, would never meet him, and had somehow, through his son's hands, through a scratched Seiko watch, through a 19-minute stop at a pawn shop on Dundas, done something for him anyway. He thought about the ceiling in the Gerrard Street building, the way it had grown, the way he hadn't stopped. There are things you do that you never expect to return to you, not because they weren't worth doing, but because the world isn't a ledger and most grace moves in directions you can't track. But sometimes it finds its way back. Sometimes a young man drives 11 hours, walks into the wrong shop at the right moment, and without knowing it carries something forward that his father started, and that a stranger's courage continued, and that nobody, in any official record, will ever fully account for. The ripple doesn't announce itself. It just moves.